A single worn-out leather chair is about to get a young, arrogant manager fired in front of his entire company, but he doesn't know it yet. In a few moments, this manager will publicly mock the quiet, elderly black man who sits in it, unaware that the CEO is watching, and that this chair holds a secret about the company's very soul that will end his career in an instant. In the bustling, open-plan office of Sterling Solutions, a company known for its aggressive growth mindset and cutting-edge technology, there existed a quiet, unwritten rule that everyone from the newest intern to the most seasoned vice president understood implicitly. It revolved around a man named Arthur Harris and the worn brown leather armchair he occupied every day during his lunch break. Mr. Harris was an institution, the oldest employee by at least 2 decades, a man who had been with the company since its humble beginnings in a cramped, rented office above a bakery. He was the company's living history, a quiet pillar of dignity whose presence was a calming constant in the chaotic world of quarterly reports and market fluctuations. Younger employees would often seek him out, not for corporate strategy, but for life advice, a calming word, or just to share a moment of peace in his serene orbit. He was the office grandfather, the keeper of stories, and the one person who remembered the names of everyone's children. And his chair, perfectly positioned in a sunlit corner of the main break room, was his throne. It wasn't a throne of power but one of profound, earned respect. Its leather was cracked and softened by decades of use, its cushions molded perfectly to the man who sat there, and the space around it was considered sacred ground. No one ever sat in Mr. Harris's chair. It wasn't a rule written in any handbook, it was a law of nature within the office, a gesture of collective deference to a man who had given his entire life to the company. The respect he commanded was a rare and beautiful thing in the modern corporate landscape, a small testament to the idea that loyalty and wisdom still held value. This kind of deep-rooted respect can feel like a relic from another time, and we're curious about the worlds you all work in. Let us know in the comments what you do for a living and where you're watching this from. It's fascinating to see the diverse community of people who believe that a person's history is more valuable than their job title. It was this very history, embodied by Mr. Harris and his simple, revered ritual, that was about to come under attack, setting the stage for a confrontation that would expose the company's true character. Into the world of quiet respect and established tradition walked David Chin, a man who saw history not as a foundation, but as a rock that needed to be carved out. Armed with a freshly minted MBA and an almost religious belief in the gospel of data, David was the new director of strategic optimization, a title he had practically invented for himself. He moved through the office like a predator, his eyes constantly scanning for inefficiencies, his tablet a weapon he used to quantify human behavior into cold, hard metrics. To him, the company wasn't a family or a community, it was a machine, and his job was to strip it down, remove any sentimental or unproductive parts, and rebuild it into a perfectly synergistic, profit-generating engine. He saw the easy camaraderie, the casual conversations in the hallways, and the long-standing traditions not as culture, but as friction slowing down progress. And the epicenter of everything he found contemptible, the very symbol of the old guard he was determined to dismantle, was Mr. Harris and his sacred leather chair. Every time David walked past the break room and saw the old man sitting there, surrounded by younger employees soaking in his quiet wisdom, he felt a visceral wave of irritation. He didn't see a mentor, he saw a bottleneck. He didn't see wisdom being shared, he saw billable hours being wasted on idle chatter. In his spreadsheets, Mr. Harris was an anomaly, a low-output employee whose value couldn't be quantified in a pivot table and therefore had no value at all. The chair, in particular, became an obsession for David. To him, it was a dusty, inefficient relic that represented everything wrong with the company, a culture that rewarded tenure over performance and valued sentimentality over brutal efficiency. He would often scoff to his own team of young, like-minded analysts, muttering about the need to disrupt legacy assets, while glaring at the corner of the break room. He saw Mr. Harris as the poster child for the decay he was hired to fight, a man coasting on reputation while contributing nothing tangible to the bottom line. This wasn't just a difference in management style, it was a fundamental clash of worldviews, a battle between the quantifiable and the intangible, and David was preparing to make his first decisive move in a very public forum, determined to prove that in his new, modernized vision for the company, there was no room for old men or their comfortable old chairs. The summons for the mandatory all-hands meeting arrived in everyone's inbox with an air of cold, digital finality. It was a quarterly ritual at Sterling Solutions, a sprawling virtual gathering that brought the entire company, from its global satellite offices to its headquarters, into a single massive video conference call. Hundreds of faces, each neatly confined to a small box, tiled across the screen, creating a mosaic of forced smiles, bored expressions, and the occasional pet wandering into the background. This digital town hall was the stage chosen by David Chin to unveil his masterwork, the future-forward efficiency plan. As his face took center stage, replacing the corporate logo, he radiated a slick, polished confidence. His presentation was a masterclass in corporate jargon, a dizzying onslaught of buzzwords like synergistic alignment, proactive disruption, and leveraging underutilized assets. He spoke with the zealous conviction of a true believer, clicking through slides filled with complex charts and aggressive growth projections that promised to trim the fat and launch the company into a new era of unprecedented profitability. To the employees watching, it was a familiar performance, another manager promising to reinvent the wheel. Most listened with a practiced passivity, their attention divided between the screen and the dozen other tasks demanding their attention. Lost in the vast grid of attendees, a sea of names and profile pictures, was one participant who seemed no different from the rest, James Sterling, CO. His icon was a simple, dark circle, his microphone muted, his camera resolutely off. He was just another name on the list, a silent, invisible presence that most assumed was merely a formality. The CEO was a busy man, likely multitasking, listening with half an ear while handling a dozen more important things. This assumption was David's first and most critical mistake. He saw the CEO's digital absence not as a potential threat, but as an implicit endorsement, a silent stage on which he could perform his vision of a ruthless, efficient future without oversight. He felt emboldened, his voice growing more strident as he laid out his plans to overhaul departments, automate roles and reevaluate every single employee's return on investment, completely oblivious to the fact that the company's ultimate authority was not just present, but listening to every single word with an intensity no one could have possibly imagined. The stage was perfectly set for David's grand gesture, his public demonstration of this new, unsentimental philosophy, unaware that his every word was being judged from the highest and quietest seat in the house. Fueled by the silent validation of the CEO's dark, inactive icon, David Chin decided it was time to move from abstract theory to a concrete, unforgettable demonstration of his philosophy. He needed to make an example to show everyone on the call that the age of sentimentality was over and that no one was exempt from the cold, hard lens of optimization. His eyes scanned the grid of video feeds, searching for the perfect target, and they landed exactly where he knew they would, on the small, unassuming window showing the main break room. There, sitting peacefully in his worn leather armchair, was Mr. Arthur Harris, listening to the presentation with a placid, attentive expression. He was the perfect symbol, the living embodiment of the legacy mindset David was determined to eradicate. A cruel, self-satisfied smile flickered across David's face. "Let's talk about real-world application," he announced, his voice taking on a new, sharper edge. "It's easy to discuss these concepts in theory, but let's look at a tangible asset right now." With a few clicks, he seized control of the meeting's focus, spotlighting the breakroom's camera feed and blowing it up to fill everyone's screen. Suddenly, hundreds of employees were staring at Mr. Harris, who blinked in surprise at the unexpected attention. The attack was as swift as it was brutal, cloaked in the sanitized language of corporate psychopathy. "Now, here we have a long-term legacy asset," David began, circling Mr. Harris's video with his mouse pointer as if he were analyzing a piece of outdated equipment. "This asset occupies a prime piece of real estate daily, consuming resources. Under the future-forward model, we must ask ourselves, what is the ROI on this activity?" He paused for dramatic effect, letting the deeply uncomfortable question hang in the dead air of the conference call. "Mr. Harris," David said, his tone dripping with condescending sweetness, "perhaps you can enlighten us. For the 40 years you've been with this company, how many synergistic outcomes have been generated from your time spent warming that particular chair? What KPIs can we attribute to that specific workflow?" The public shaming was breathtaking in its audacity. David was weaponizing his corporate jargon, turning words meant for spreadsheets and strategy sessions into instruments of humiliation. He continued his relentless assault, asking Mr. Harris about the strategic value add of his break-time deployment, and whether his decades of static resource allocation could be better leveraged in a more agile, results-oriented paradigm. It was a masterclass in cruelty disguised as corporate strategy, a live vivisection of a man's dignity for the sake of making a point, all while the entire company and its silent CEO watched in stunned, horrified disbelief. The moment David's words landed, a profound and absolute silence fell over the virtual meeting, a digital void so complete it was as if the internet itself was holding its breath. The relentless hum of corporate activity ceased. Hundreds of video feeds, a vibrant tapestry of professional life just moments before, became a grid of frozen, horrified faces. Microphones that had been carelessly left unmuted, picking up the sounds of typing or background chatter, were now frantically silenced. In private chat windows, a storm of frantic, whispered messages erupted between colleagues. Is this really happening? Someone needs to stop him. Where is HR? It was a collective, silent gasp, a shared moment of profound second-hand humiliation. Employees stared at their screens, their faces a mixture of shock, pity, and disgust. They looked away as if making eye contact with their own webcams was too much to bear, yet they were unable to disconnect, trapped as unwilling witnesses to a public execution of a man's dignity. But in the center of the storm, in the spotlight of the main screen, Mr. Arthur Harris remained an island of unshakable calm. He did not flinch. He did not lower his gaze or show any sign of anger or embarrassment. The cruel, jargon-laden barbs seemed to wash over him, unable to find purchase on his serene composure. He simply sat in his worn leather chair, his back straight, his hands resting gently in his lap, and looked directly into the camera. His expression was not one of defiance, but of a deep, sorrowful, and almost paternal disappointment. He was not a victim being assailed. He was a mountain being pelted with pebbles, utterly unmoved. This profound dignity, this refusal to participate in his own humiliation, seemed to infuriate David more than any angry retort could have. He had expected fear or shame or a flustered defense, emotions he could exploit and control. Mr. Harris's quiet strength was an utter rejection of David's power, and it drove him to escalate his attack. No answer, Mr. Harris? David sneered, his voice laced with venom. I guess it's hard to quantify a zero-sum contribution. He doubled down, his mockery becoming more personal, more pointed, chipping away at the very foundations of the old man's long loyal career. Yet with every fresh insult, Mr. Harris's composure only deepened, his silence becoming louder and more powerful than David's frantic, empty words. The tension on the call stretched to an unbearable, screaming pitch, a silent battle of wills between naked aggression and steadfast grace, waiting for an intervention that seemed as if it would never come. Just as David was about to deliver another condescending blow, a new sound entered the dead-silent audio feed. It wasn't loud. It wasn't a shout. It was a single word, spoken with a calm, resonant authority that seemed to physically vibrate through every laptop speaker and earbud across the company. David. The name, spoken by a voice no one had heard yet on the call, cut through the tension with the clean, terrifying finality of a guillotine blade. For a split second, confusion reigned. Then, in the grid of participants, a small, dark circle labeled James Sterling, CO, which had been dormant and invisible for the entire meeting, came to life. The black circle vanished, replaced by the flickering icon of a live camera activating. A moment later, the CEO's video feed bloomed onto the screen, instantly hijacking the spotlight from David's cruel spectacle. The image that filled everyone's monitor was not what they expected. There was no sterile, corporate boardroom, no panoramic view of a city skyline, no branded corporate backdrop. Instead, James Sterling was revealed to be in a warm, personal study, surrounded by floor-to-ceiling bookshelves crammed with old leather-bound volumes. The soft light from a desk lamp illuminated framed family photographs, pictures of children laughing, a wedding portrait, and, prominently displayed, a faded black-and-white photo of a much younger man who was unmistakably his father. The entire scene radiated a sense of history, family, and humanity, the very things David had just spent the last 10 minutes deriding as inefficient and obsolete. And in the center of this warm, intimate world sat the CEO himself. His face was a mask of placid, almost serene control, yet his eyes burned with a cold, righteous fury that was far more terrifying than any outward display of anger. He wasn't enraged, he was disgusted. His gaze was not directed at the hundreds of employees watching in stunned silence. It was locked directly onto David Chin, a laser beam of judgment that traversed the digital space and pinned the young manager to his chair. The entire dynamic of the call inverted in that single, heart-stopping second. The collective, silent horror of the employees transformed into a palpable wave of relief. David, who had been the confident, predatory ringmaster of this public humiliation, was suddenly reduced to a stammering, wide-eyed defendant, trapped in the unforgiving glare of the ultimate authority. He had assumed he was performing on an empty stage, but he now found himself standing center spotlight, exposed and utterly alone, before the one man he had fatally underestimated. The CEO, James Sterling, did not raise his voice. He didn't need to. The cold, controlled fury in his eyes was enough to command the absolute attention of every single person on the call. He let the silence hang for a few moments longer, a deliberate, suffocating pause that allowed David Chin to fully comprehend the gravity of his new, precarious position. David's face, once a mask of smug superiority, had collapsed into a puddle of pale, sweating fear. He opened his mouth to speak, to perhaps apologize or explain, but the CO began to talk before he could form a single syllable. "David," Mr. Sterling began, his voice still unervingly calm, almost conversational, which made the undercurrent of rage all the more terrifying. "I've been listening to your future-forward plan with great interest. A very ambitious presentation." For a fleeting, insane moment, a flicker of hope might have crossed David's mind. Was this a reprimand followed by a professional critique? But the hope was instantly extinguished by the CEO's next words. "And after careful consideration," Mr. Sterling continued, leaning slightly forward into his camera, "I have one single, crucial piece of feedback on your presentation." He paused again, ensuring that every employee from London to Singapore was leaning into their screens, holding their breath for the judgment that was about to be delivered. Then, with a quiet, devastating precision, he delivered the sentence that would be repeated in company lore for years to come. "Get out of my father's chair." The words landed in the virtual room like a physical object, causing a shockwave of pure, unadulterated confusion. Hundreds of employees blinked at their screens. Was the CEO confused? Had he misspoken? His feed clearly showed him in his study. The camera was on Mr. Harris, who was sitting in the worn leather armchair in the break room. David, seizing on this apparent confusion as a possible lifeline, found his voice, which came out as a panicked, high-pitched stammer. "Mr. Sterling, sir, I think there's a misunderstanding. I'm in my office. It's Mr. Harris who is sitting in the chair," he said, desperately trying to deflect the laser focus of the CEO's wrath back onto his original victim. He was correcting the CEO, a fatal error born of sheer terror. James Sterling's expression did not change. His eyes narrowed into slits of ice, and the thin veneer of calm finally cracked, revealing the furnace of fury beneath. He let David's pathetic defense hang in the air for a final, excruciating beat before delivering the clarification that would instantly end the young manager's career. "I know who is sitting in the chair, David," the CEO said, his voice now dropping to a low, chilling whisper that was somehow louder than a shout. "I wasn't talking to Mr. Harris." A wave of collective, dawning comprehension washed over the entire company, a silent, global gasp as the true meaning of the CEO's words settled in. The final, chilling clarification, "I wasn't talking to Mr. Harris," was a seismic event, instantly reframing the entire power dynamic. It wasn't Mr. Harris who was being ordered to move, it was David who was metaphorically occupying a seat of judgment and authority to which he had no right. With a single dismissive click, Mr. Sterling muted David's microphone, silencing his stammering protests and symbolically erasing him from the conversation he had so arrogantly started. The young manager's face, frozen in a rictus of pure terror, remained visible on the screen, a silent, humiliated monument to his own catastrophic miscalculation. Then, addressing the entire company, his voice softening from cold fury to a tone of warm, reverent remembrance, Mr. Sterling began to unveil the legend. He gestured towards the black and white photograph in his study, the one of his father. 42 years ago, he began, Sterling Solutions wasn't this global entity. It was two young men in a rented room no bigger than my office kitchen, with a borrowed coffee pot and a dream that everyone told them was impossible. He spoke of the grueling hours, the near failures, and the unwavering partnership between his father, the visionary, and his father's very first hire, a brilliant, steadfast young man named Arthur Harris, who was not just an employee but his best friend. "My father handled the sales and the vision," Mr. Sterling continued, his eyes now fixed on Mr. Harris's live feed, a look of profound respect on his face. "But Arthur, Mr. Harris, he was the one who made it all work. He built the systems, he managed the books, he was the steady hand that kept the ship from sinking a dozen times over. This company wasn't built by one man, it was built by a partnership, a friendship." Then he told them the story of the chair. He described the day the company finally turned its first real profit, a moment not of lavish celebration but of quiet, tearful relief. His father, instead of buying himself something, took the meager earnings and went to a furniture store. He bought the most comfortable, well-made leather armchair he could find. It wasn't company furniture. It was a personal, heartfelt gift. "My father brought that chair back to the office," Mr. Sterling said, his voice thick with emotion, "and he put it in that exact corner of the break room, He told Arthur, "This company is as much yours as it is mine, and I never want you to forget it. You will always have the most comfortable seat in the house we built together." The chair wasn't a symbol of inefficiency, it was the company's first throne, a monument to loyalty, a daily physical reminder of the human connection upon which the entire corporate empire was actually built. The revelation hung in the air, a stunning, history-altering truth that left the entire company speechless. The immediate aftermath was not chaotic, it was executed with the swift, cold precision of a surgeon. James Sterling did not waste another moment on the humiliated, frozen face of David Chen. His gaze shifted slightly as if looking at a name on his other monitor, and his voice regained its commanding, executive tone, now completely devoid of the personal emotion from moments before. "Cynthia," he said, addressing the head of human resources who was also on the call. "Please initiate a private breakout session with Mr. Chin immediately. I expect his resignation on my desk within the hour. His network access is to be terminated at the conclusion of your call." It was a corporate execution, delivered calmly and publicly. There was no room for appeal, no debate. With a few clicks from an invisible administrator, David Chen's video feed simply vanished from the screen, not with a dramatic flare, but with a quiet, unceremonious pop, as if he had never been there at all. His presence was surgically excised from the company's consciousness, a ghost already fading into memory. With the source of the toxicity removed, Mr. Sterling's focus, and indeed the focus of all 500 employees, returned to the man in the leather armchair. The CEO's face transformed, the cold mask of authority melting away to be replaced by a look of genuine, profound warmth and respect that was almost paternal. "Now," he continued, a slight smile touching his lips for the first time, "for the most important part of today's meeting." He looked directly at Mr. Harris through the screen, speaking not just to him, but for the benefit of everyone listening. "It has been a gross oversight on my part and my father's before me, that Mr. Harris's role in this company has never been properly formalized. He has been a mentor, a guide, and the keeper of our institutional soul for over 40 years, a role he performed not for a title or for recognition, but out of loyalty and love for what he helped build." The CEO paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "Effective immediately, I am honored to announce the creation of a new position at this company, Senior Advisor to the CEO. And I am even more honored to announce that its first and most qualified occupant will be Mr. Arthur Harris." The promotion was not a token gesture. It was a fundamental recalibration of the company's values, a public declaration that wisdom trumped metrics and that history was not a liability but the company's greatest asset. "His duties," Mr. Sterling concluded, his voice filled with sincere admiration, "will be to continue doing exactly what he has always done, ensuring that we, as a company, never forget who we are and where we came from. His counsel will be invaluable as we move forward." The invisible barrier between the CEO and the hundreds of employees seemed to dissolve, replaced by a shared understanding that they had just witnessed a defining moment, a course correction that affirmed the very soul of their workplace. The sterile, intimidating silence of the CEO's office had been replaced by something new in the days following the momentous all-hands meeting. The air itself felt warmer, more human, imbued with a sense of restored balance. The change was crystallized by a single, profound alteration to the room's landscape. In the corner where a sleek, minimalist modern sculpture once stood, now rested the old brown leather armchair, its cracks and worn patches looking not out of place, but like a revered monument finally given its place of honor. It had been moved from the break room to the very heart of the company's power structure, a physical declaration of the new reigning philosophy. Seated in the chair was Mr. Arthur Harris, a cup of tea resting in his hand, a gentle, easy laugh crinkling the corners of his eyes. Across from him, not behind his sprawling mahogany desk, but perched on a simple standard office chair as if he were the visitor, sat James Sterling. The CEO was laughing too, a genuine, unburdened sound that echoed the newfound health of the company's soul. The scene was not one of formal advisement, but of a deep, comfortable friendship rekindled and rightly acknowledged. "So you really think we should invest more in the pension fund instead of the new cloud computing venture?" Sterling asked, his question sincere, seeking genuine counsel. Mr. Harris took a slow sip of his tea before answering, his voice as calm and steady as it had been under David Chen's vicious attack. "The cloud will still be there next year, James," he said softly. "But Maria in accounting retires in 6 months. She's been with us for 35 years. She gave us her life's work. Making sure her future is secure isn't an expense, it's paying a debt of honor. That sends a better message to our people than any new software ever could." This was the nature of his advisement. He spoke not of metrics or synergies, but of people, of loyalty, of the human cost and consequence of every corporate decision. He reminded James of employee anniversaries, of the names of their children, of the small human details that David Chen's spreadsheets could never capture and that James himself, lost in the stratosphere of executive leadership, had begun to forget. The chair was no longer just a chair, it was the seat of wisdom, the true center of the company's moral compass. It was a daily physical reminder to the CEO that the foundation of his father's empire wasn't built on stock prices or market disruption, but on the bedrock of human decency and mutual respect. The lesson was clear to anyone who entered the office. True power did not reside in the grand desk of the CEO, but in the quiet wisdom of the man who occupied his father's chair. This story is a testament to the belief that integrity and respect are the most valuable assets any organization can have. If you've made it this far, it's likely because you share that belief, and if you want to continue seeing tales that honor the quiet heroes and timeless values that truly matter in our world, consider subscribing to the channel to ensure you never miss a single one.